There's a particular kind of pressure that comes not from being expected to fail, but from being expected to be invisible. Failure at least means someone was watching. Invisibility means they've already moved on. In 1968, Julio Iglesias walked into the Eurovision Song Contest as an unknown. Not a promising unknown, not a dangerous unknown, just an unknown. The organizers scheduled him last. The press didn't mention him. The other contestants didn't know his name. What happened in the minutes before he walked on stage that night is the part nobody talks about. To understand what Eurovision meant in 1968, you have to understand what it meant to be Spanish in 1968. Franco's Spain was still a country living under the long shadow of a dictator that had been in place since 1939. Culture was controlled, movement was restricted, and the idea of a young Spaniard standing on a pan-European stage and being taken seriously by the rest of the continent carried a weight that went far beyond music. Eurovision wasn't just a song contest. For Spain, it was a window. And for Julio Iglesias, it was the only window he had. He had come to music late and sideways. 3 years earlier, in 1963, he had been a goalkeeper for Real Madrid's youth team. Not a star, but good enough. Moving in the right direction. Then came the car accident. A late night, a road outside Madrid, a vehicle that lost control. Julio spent the next 18 months in a hospital bed, partially paralyzed, uncertain whether he would walk again. A nurse, trying to fill the silence of his recovery, brought him a guitar. He had never played before. He had no particular reason to believe he could. But in that bed, with nothing else available to him, he began. By 1968, he had written songs, performed in small venues, built a modest following in Spain. He was 24 years old. He was not by any serious measure ready for Eurovision. But the Spanish selection committee chose him anyway and gave him a song called Vida, sigue, igual. The life goes on the same. There was something almost too on the nose about that title for a man who had rebuilt himself from a hospital bed, though nobody at the time was paying enough attention to notice. The 1968 Eurovision Song Contest was held in London at the Royal Albert Hall. It was the first year the contest was broadcast in color. The audience was enormous, an estimated 200 million viewers across Europe. The favorites that year were well known. The UK had a strong showing. France arrived with confidence. Julio Iglesias arrived with a guitar and a song that the European press had not mentioned once in their pre-contest coverage. He was scheduled to perform last. In theory, an advantageous position. In practice, for an unknown performer, it meant sitting backstage for hours while the contest unfolded around him, watching the other acts build momentum, feeling the weight of what he was about to walk into grow heavier with each passing performance. People who were with him backstage that night described a young man who was outwardly calm and inwardly somewhere else entirely. He didn't pace. He didn't talk excessively. He sat with his guitar and occasionally played fragments of his song, not rehearsing exactly, more like reassuring himself that the notes were still there. Somewhere in those hours, he made a decision about what the performance was going to be. Not a technical decision about the song, a decision about what he was bringing to the stage beyond the music. The accident, the paralysis, the months in the hospital bed, the guitar a nurse had left in his room. All of it was coming on stage with him whether he invited it or not. He decided to invite it. When Julio Iglesias finally walked out onto the stage of the Royal Albert Hall, the audience response was polite. Not the warmth reserved for familiar names, not the charged anticipation that greeted the favorites. Just the open, slightly neutral attention of 200 million people who didn't yet know who he was. He sang La Vida Sigue Igual, and something happened that is difficult to describe without making it sound more dramatic than it was. Not a sudden eruption. The crowd didn't leap to its feet. What happened was quieter. A gradual shift in the quality of attention in the room. The specific stillness that falls over an audience when they realize that what they're hearing is the real thing. Not the winner's podium. Fourth. The Spanish press covered it as a near miss. The European press barely covered it at all. But the song had been heard. And in the weeks and months that followed, La Vida Sigue Igual began to move through Spain with the momentum of a song that had found its moment, person to person. Because it meant something to the people who heard it. Within a year, it had sold over 4 million copies in Spain alone. Julio Iglesias had gone from unknown to the most listened to Spanish artist of his generation in 12 months. But here is the part that gets lost in the version of this story that focuses on the triumph. A win in 1968 would have made him Eurovision's Act of the Year, and then handed him the specific merciless pressure that comes with being exactly what everyone expects. The industry would have known what to do with him, which means the industry would have shaped him into something it already understood. Fourth place left him free. Not ignored. He had been heard. The song had landed. The foundation was real, but free from the particular cage that winning builds around a performer before they've had time to figure out who they actually are. The career that followed. 300 million records, 14 languages, 5 decades of sold-out stadiums, was built on that freedom. Not on the victory that didn't come, but on the result that left him just enough room to grow into himself without interference. There is a version of success that arrives exactly on schedule and shapes everything that comes after it in ways you don't fully control. And there is a version that arrives sideways, incomplete, slightly off from what you hoped for, and leaves you in that gap between what you wanted and what you got, exactly enough space to become something no one could have predicted. Julio Iglesias came fourth at Eurovision, 1968. The life went on the same, just as the song said. And then, because it did, it became something extraordinary